Hello, everyone. Welcome to this third Above Difference birthday webinar series. And I have to say, I'm super excited about this one. We're just a few days away from UK Black History Month, which you may know the theme this year is saluting our sisters. That's a message I'm here for. 100%. And this webinar is about why cultural intelligence and inclusive leadership matters for Black, Asian and ethnic minority leaders, because it matters for us too. This is a conversation. It's going to feel a little bit different to the other ones because I'm definitely going to have as much to say, I think, as our participants in today's webinar. And definitely saluting our sisters is something we probably don't do enough of. So any opportunity to do that, I'm absolutely here for that. And I'm delighted that I've been invited to host this one. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Marsha Ramroop. Just to be clear, because there are two Marshas today, which I'm going to get into. I too work in cultural intelligence, and I have always been so proud to be associated with Above Difference, which is the leading provider of cultural intelligence solutions to the public sector in the UK. I do have my own CQ consultancy called Unheard Voice, or work in strategic organisational inclusion. I'm your facilitator this afternoon, but your host, the wonderful, amazing, delightful Jennifer Izekor, CEO of Above Difference. Jennifer.
Thank you, Marsha. And yeah, there are two Marshas today, but we have got a solution for that. And I'm going to let Marsha tell you all about it in a minute. But it's just incredibly exciting to be here. And, this is the third one of a series of 4 birthday webinars. I think we should have had 5 to just do 5 webinars, 5 birthday. But, I think we missed a trick there, Marsha. We just couldn't get you for the 5th one. It was one of the 2. But anyway, this is the third one. I like you, really excited about this because this feels like it's just going to be a really great conversation. And I'm incredibly excited with our guests that we have here. But I think what's also great about this, Marsha, you're absolutely right. This is about leaders. You're a leader yourself. And so I hope that the conversation that we're going to have is going to be one that really draws on all our experiences. And I can see we've already got quite an audience. Welcome to everyone. Really pleased you're here. And as Nema's on the screen, I just want to say, here's Nema as well. She's our corporate relations manager at Above Difference. And she'll be answering all your questions as well. And so if you do have questions while we're going on, as Marsha will tell you, pop them in the box and Nema will be talking to us about them as time goes on. So let's hope we have a great afternoon. Thank you.
I'm sure it will be a great afternoon. We're going to be with you for about an hour and a half. And we do have the Q&A facility open. So if you want to chat with other participants, use the chat for that. But if you have a specific question for the panel today, then if you put that in the Q&A box, then we're able to siphon out those questions. But any other comments, interactions with other audience members, then feel free to put that in the chat. With the kind of nice advantage of the Q&A box is that you can anonymize your question if you want to. And of course, if we're on socials, please let everyone know that you're joining this incredible experience by tagging at Above Difference and using the hashtag leading difference differently on your socials. So today we're joined by 2 exceptional guests. I'll let them introduce themselves. Joselyn King and Marsha Jones. We're going to call MJ today. And I have to say, I love it when I meet a Marsha. They're not many of us, but those of us are, I think the collective noun for Marshas is an amazing of Marshas. Just going to put that out there. And we will come to them in just a moment. But first, Jennifer, your 5th birthday. I just think it's such an incredible, dare I say, selfless thing to do, to use these opportunities to celebrate, not by just, having cake, although, I'm still waiting for my cake to arrive. I don't know what happened to it. It got squashed in the post. But also to share. To give others the benefit of the experience that people have had with Above Difference so far. So Jennifer, please just tell us a little bit more about the thinking behind wanting to share in this way for your anniversary.
Which is really exciting. And just for the record, I know people are wondering, I'm not 5, it's above difference. That's 5. Yeah. I just want to point that out. Yeah. Yeah. But no, seriously, it's been 5 years, and it's been 5 incredible years. And I just feel so blessed and honored to have had the opportunity to work with so many leaders. I could have so many people on this, on this panel today. So I'm just really, really excited to have Marsha and Joselyn. JJ, Joselyn and I are just going to sort of keep our J's to one side, so we're representing as well. But why this particular one? Because I think leadership is such an interesting challenge for leaders from Black and minority ethnic communities. And, we've done work across the spectrum. We work with the public sector. We've done specific projects, and you'll hear about some of those where we've worked with leaders from Black and minority ethnic communities. We work with leaders across the board. And we often say inclusion has to be about everyone, or it becomes about no one. But I did want to highlight, I'm very proud of some of the work that we have done, and I did want to highlight that, but also just give us an opportunity to raise some of the issues about what are the specific challenges for leaders from our communities. And I use our in a widest possible sense. What does it mean to be a leader? Why does cultural intelligence inclusive leadership matter specifically for us as well? And why, how does our model in particular of culturally intelligent and inclusive leadership, how is it making a difference, and how has it made a difference? And I think, there's something about when it comes to this huge agenda, there are no magic bullets, there are no quick solutions. But I think if we are finding that things are making a difference, and I think we have an obligation to share that, and really think about what we can do and how we can grow that. And that's why we've got this today, really.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to give our guests an opportunity to share a bit about themselves. So, Marsha, MJ, if you can start by saying who you are, where you're from, and how you came across Above Difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Marsha. Happy birthday, Jennifer. Happy 5th birthday Above Difference, I should say. But it's all part and parcel of who you are. So a little bit about me, because there's lots about me that I could talk about all day, because I love myself that much. And that's the first place today to start with. So I'm Marsha Jones, called MJ in a lot of different spaces as per the initial. I'm an educator by background, so I'm one of you little nerdies that is trained to teach chem, physics, and biology, but then switch careers. And that may be new for some people because they never know that before. But I'm a nurse and a midwife who has worked in different parts of the system. So back in the day, who knows about clinical commissioning groups? I've worked in acute. I'm dually qualified, as I've mentioned, worked in national role, leading on things like end-of-life care. And I've worked most recently in an acute organization as deputy chief nurse, but also as site chief nurse. And I'm currently occupying a leadership role in the ICB as a director of quality, and I'm also the clinical lead for the patient safety incidents response framework for the clinicians in the room who are all active in the patient safety space. And regarding interest, really have a real interest in around all things EDI and cultural intelligence. Hence, I have come across the work that Jennifer has been doing. So how did I connect with Jennifer? During the pandemic, the Nigerian Nurses Association, the chair, Wendy, a colleague of mine, and the other diaspora groups, we were running different webinars. And Jennifer presented on that, and that really stimulated my interest. Not at all just the educator jumped out, but everything in my being came to life, because we were at that place that it was about emotional intelligence, whereas I see cultural intelligence transcends that. So on the back of attending that event, I then attended the workshop around cultural intelligence. And I'm telling you, it totally shifted my mindset, how I view the world, how I interacted with others. But it also just opened my lens that Black and minority ethnic leaders, or everybody who has melanin in their skin, really should undertake this workshop. So I've given you enough there, Marsha, to work with, I hope.
Oh, plenty. Plenty. Joselyn, a little bit about you and how you came across Above Difference as well.
Thank you, Marsha. Well, I'm going to have to say happy birthday to Above Difference, happy 5th birthday to Above Difference, since Marsha or MJ said happy birthday. So I'm Joselyn King. My substantive role is Head of GP Partnerships at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust. However, I do wear a couple of other hats as well. So I'm one of the workforce, or NHSE's Workforce Race Equality Standard experts. I did that course about 3 or 4 years ago. And that's what really was the impetus to my other hat, which is founder and chair of the Multidisciplinary Race Equality Network at the Trust. We launched back in 2020, so we've been going for about 3 years now. And one of the, I suppose one of the observations that we had is when COVID started. So when COVID started, we realized the disproportionate impact on colleagues from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. And so one of the first things I did is that I created something called the Race Equality Ambassadors. They were originally the BAME Ambassadors, but we've changed the name, the Race Equality Ambassadors. And they were there really to provide support and guidance to colleagues of Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds in whichever area they could, to provide that support, and that's continued. And so I met Jennifer because I won some funding from Imperial Charity, which is our official charity, via NHS Charities Together, to upskill our race equality ambassadors, and at the same time upskill our committee members at the network as well. So I did some sourcing, did some scoping, found out about Jennifer, had a conversation with her. I had a modicum of cultural intelligence training when I did the WRES course, so I sort of understood it, and that was it was an awakening for me at that time. But after speaking to Jennifer, and hearing about, cultural intelligence and leading with CQ and she tailored the course especially for our cohort. I was blown away, and I echo what Marsha said. It completely shifted my perspective.
Really interesting, both of you using terms that about the new lens, the opening of the eyes, the scales falling from your eyes, if I may use a biblical reference, and certainly feeling that it's these light bulb moments firing off in a way, even when we have been doing this work for quite some time, trying to take people on a journey with us to understand what it means to manage diversity, to lead with inclusion. And you introduce cultural intelligence, and suddenly there's a clarity about how not only we can do this well for others, but the self-work that we need to do as well. So, both of you nodding there. MJ, if you can articulate, what was the self-work that you were able to do as a result? And I'll bring in Joselyn after that.
That's a very insightful question, actually. And I say insightful because when you do the analysis, or whatever you want to, whatever the title I want to call that worksheet that you do, and then Jennifer takes you through what your responses are, and there's no right or wrong way as to how you are, but it's what that means to you. And as a leader, because I've done so much leadership development, I'm probably totally leadership out, if there's such a thing. So you realize how adaptable you are to different spaces, but you become a little bit more aware of your blind spots. And I'm a Black woman, so when things don't go your way, you automatically think it's racism, and you're not necessarily thinking about your impact in that space. And that didn't mean that you're not self-aware. So how I've been able to use that is that I was occupying a leadership space during COVID, and I was the most senior Black nurse in that organization. Similar to Joselyn, gotten some collaborated with the hospital charity to submitted the bid, and we got the money in. Now, unlike Joselyn, I didn't go scoping because I'd already had front row seat and know that this was going to be impactful. And my approach when I spoke to Jennifer was very different. this wasn't about white leaders. This was about inclusivity of everybody. And we were tearing it at board level and going through the different tiers so that people have that understanding and to be able to support them better. But then coming back to my own self, some of the impact of COVID has given me clarity in thought. Because if you think about the people who died in COVID, when we talk about their hierarchy, the countries in which they are and their behaviors, how they're more likely to be submissive. I normally pride myself on the fact that I'm Jamaican and they sent the most unruly slaves to Jamaica, so I'm never a conformist. So in that sense, where people will say, well, I was sent to wards even though they had COVID on there and I was mindful of my own comorbidities. Now it's a no-brainer for me, Marsha, because nobody would get me to do something that's going to compromise me, whereas other people did. So it enabled me to understand not only where my strengths lie, but how I could empower others to think differently. And, you know, I said it's a one-day thing, and ever so often I revisit my responses to ground me. But I think I'm at this place now where I need to redo the day all over again to feel like I need that total refresh of knowledge base. And wherever I go, I plug cultural intelligence. At some point, probably people start to think I'm a subject matter expert. I said, no, Above Difference is your place to go. I'm just an enlightened ambassador.
Well, Marsha, I'm sure Jennifer will give you a good discount on doing it again. Joselyn, really, really interesting to hear what MJ was saying there, and really importantly, that self-work piece. You have this incredible video that you've done with Above Difference, and I think Naeem is just going to pop that in the chat actually, because I do recommend everyone has a look at it, because of the kind of things that participants were saying about the transformation in their own behaviors. These are Black, Asian, and ethnic minority people in the organizations saying, I realize I need to change my behaviors as well. So tell me a little bit about that journey and some of the responses in that video.
The journey was phenomenal, and the journey was phenomenal because there was actual behavior change underlying it all. And I'll start off with me, because I truly believe that, I think we mentioned before about having that lens, that gaze. I think once you mentioned sort of like the scales dropping, that was exactly what it felt like. Because as opposed to looking at situations, you know, with maybe a racial lens, it was beyond race. I was looking at it in terms of culture. And one of the most, I suppose, poignant for me on a personal level, let's move professional out of the way, was when Jennifer recounted the story about her and her daughter. And I looked at the situation with mine and my daughter and thinking that, well, she's my daughter, she's with me, so obviously she's got to be like me. And Jennifer completely switched my viewpoint in recognizing that my daughter was of a completely different culture. And so in every sphere, personal and professional, I look at everything through that cultural intelligence lens, I suppose you could say. So for me, I think that was the most poignant moment. But in terms of my colleagues, I mean, there's been impacts from recruitment, because one of the things that we did is that we had a real wide range of colleagues right across our trust, you know, from band 5s to VSMs, because I wanted as wide a reach as possible. So, you know, we have colleagues who are going to change their recruitment practices, colleagues who now look at, you know, conflicts and situations differently. And so for me, the most impactful thing has been the behavioral change, and the behavioral change that I'm going through, and also that I'm witnessing in my colleagues as well.
I think one of the great things about CQ and cultural intelligence, and Jennifer's popped in the chat the definition of cultural intelligence, the capability to work, function, and relate effectively across cultural difference. So, of course, its capability is malleable, it can be improved,
Yes.
It's about functioning. So it's about that working, that doing stuff, but it's also about relating. It's about relationships, it's about people. It's about, you talked about your daughter, it's about parents. It's about your lover, your spouse, your partner. It's about the person who you see every day in the shop that you go
Across
to.
the board.
Yeah, across the board.
That's
It's a
right.
human capability that you can then bring about in how to be effective when trying to relate across that difference. And so really it encourages you in so many ways. There's so much to learn. You're always learning, always growing, always developing. But really importantly, when we look at ourselves in the mirror and the melanin in our skin, and it can frame so much of how we exist in our lives. And then we bring that into an organization like the NHS. We've got Roger Klein back 10 years ago talking about the snowy white peaks of the NHS. And then as people of color or BME or however you want to describe us, global majority, trying to navigate that and trying to bring others on a journey to understand how inclusive cultures can really make a difference. It can be easier, can't it, to say, well, actually it's you that needs to change, not me. So what kind of reflections have you had from participants going through this to say, well, actually, this is how I can do this differently in order to bring people on a better journey? Joselyn, I'll ask you first before asking MJ to follow up.
I'll refer back to what I said in terms of one of my colleagues. She does quite a bit of recruitment, and it's changed her perspective in how she recruits. And I think it's given her an understanding of culture in essence. Another colleague, there was a conflict situation that she was able to handle in a different way, merely because of gaining that awareness. So for me, I think it's the way that we action situations now, the way that we behave. And for me, I think really my own sense of cultural awareness has definitely made me more inclusive, because I don't look at things through a race lens anymore, if I'm absolutely. And I think that's for me, I think that's one of the values of cultural intelligence. It's beyond race, because when you talk about, unconscious bias, and you talk about all of, oh God, I can't remember the other one. Gosh, it's gone out of my mind. But basically, when you look at those kinds of interventions, I don't think they're as tangible as you have with cultural intelligence, most definitely.
MJ.
I think for me, it was insightful to people acknowledging these softer skills, because as a leader and as you try, navigate your space, these are soft skills that you have to have that willingness to want to change and adapt as you navigate your landscape. I remember when we did the first cohort that went through, it was kind of, in psychology, we would call it the ha-ha moment, from an educationalist perspective, that's when you say learning has taken place. And as Stephen Covey would say, the teacher will appear when the learner is ready, right? So it's that kind of bit, and you could see people actively be thinking, either through recruitment, how be open to feedback. I remember some of the feedback that we even brought to the board, because some of the work that I did alongside the cultural intelligence piece was to wrap governance around the staff network, and that led into a board development session. We had nets in tears because they never knew that people with melanin in an organization which they're leading felt that way, and really owning that. So it was, I wouldn't want to call it like a volcano erupting, but from a change perspective, you would want to coin it that way, because sometimes to enact the change, you need the volcano to erupt to get to that place. And as I said, I'm that enlightened ambassador. So in maternity, because I'm dually qualified, I would be going on and on about it, that, something must be wrong here. If we got our Embrace report that keeps telling us that Black and minority ethnic women are dying, and we have a dominant workforce of Black and minority ethnic staff, something is not right, because the very nature of that, you're meant to be advocating for others. So there has to be a shift in thinking. And I was able to be influencing that in other spaces around, like even in end-of-life care. So I don't know how many of you realize that it's not a lot of people who look like me and you on screen that provide care in that space. So no wonder our culture tend to have a fear factor around death, because somebody coming to talk to you at the most fragile aspect to your life don't really understand. So it sits in every aspect of your life, should you wish to compartmentalize it. It is inclusive, as it says on the tin, in every way, every subset that you may want to think of it. And it transcends the protected characteristics. And not being biblical, Marsha, as you talk about removing the scales from the lens, it's that humanistic approach that let's treat people as human. If you cut me, you see red. So during COVID, my little mantra, and I made t-shirts that my girls would wear, my blood is red and so is yours. It allows you to let that be the core of your thinking.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, when you listen to that, you must be delighted, obviously, because these are the kind of light bulb moments that you aim for. But what other thoughts and reflections have you had just hearing from MJ and Joselyn there about the journeys they've been on so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I am delighted. And you know, when I did, you know, and we've both done this cultural intelligence program together, you know, we're both trained facilitators. And when I can remember doing it myself, and I did it, just those light bulb moments going off. And I love the model, but I also realized as I began to think about how it could make a difference to the inclusion agenda that I needed to adapt it, and I needed to sort of shape it around some other key leadership principles to actually make it work. For this agenda. And it's been great that we've been able to do that, which is why we deliver the leading and engaging inclusively with cultural intelligence, which allows us to focus on that, you know, really robust model, but also flesh it out with a number of other things. And, you know, we talked about the fact earlier that it's about those personal engagements, but one of the really powerful pieces of work that we do as well is getting people to really think about that culture bit, you know, and what does culture mean? When we talk about culture, what does it mean? And how do we navigate those cultures? And I love what Joselyn said earlier about suddenly you begin to look at it and you see culture everywhere. You know, when I did that program and began to really understand that actually, as you know, as Joselyn said, my daughter and I, who's a millennial, who is, you know, born in this country, you know, and I was born in this country, but spent a lot of time in Nigeria, I often say to people, and so I've crossed 2 continents, but culturally, she's very different from me. And actually, even within that space, you know, understanding how we navigate those cultures. And that's why I think this is so important for us as leaders from Black and minority ethnic communities, because we're constantly having to navigate a lot of cultures, and we're constantly having to step across, in many ways, sit astride a whole range of different cultures, which most people will do, but there's probably more for us, especially if we've grown up, have our family roots in other ethnic cultures, professional cultures, all of those things. And so the opportunity to work with leaders to get them to take a step back in ways, not undermining the importance of the race agenda by any long shot, but actually saying, take a step back for a minute, look at the different cultures around you. Look at how you're navigating those as a leader from a Black and minority ethnic community. How are you using, what skills do you need to have to engage with those cultures in a really effective way? Now, we know that the research tells us that cultural intelligence increases adaptability and resilience anyway, when you're navigating diverse cultures. So when you then add on stuff around inclusive leadership, when you then challenge people's perception of leadership as a whole and how they actually present themselves as leaders, then you begin to get this really potent mix, I think, that really helps people, you know, begin to think about things differently. And what was important to me in designing that mix, given my own experiences as a Black leader, was how we empowered Black leaders, you know, because I love the fact that leaders from Black and minority ethnic communities walk away from that program feeling empowered, feeling they're able to stand in that leadership space and stand confidently in that space and using. So when I hear Joselyn and MJ talk about how they've been able to use that to just do the things they've done. You know, I mean, they're exceptional leaders anyway, and I'm just incredibly proud to have worked with them. But yeah, to add value to that, yeah, that rocks my boat, definitely.
Really importantly, all of you have spoken about trying to step away from just talking about the race agenda. But when you're working with, Black colleagues and brown colleagues who want to push the race agenda, don't understand maybe about why you'd want to do a program that isn't an anti-racism program, how have you been navigating that, Joselyn?
To be honest with you, I feel that cultural intelligence really surpasses all the protected characteristics. I think it's Marsha that said that. So for me, there are colleagues who, let's say, so in my trust, we have a fairly big trust. I think we have over 14,500 staff members. And there are a lot of people who are resentful about the race agenda, or who feel put out because of the race agenda. But what you find is cultural intelligence seeps through all of that, because all of a sudden the focus isn't on, well, you're Black, you're Asian, you're this and that. No, it's about, well, this is your culture, because I could have the same culture as an Indian colleague or be more aligned with an Asian colleague than I am with a fellow Black colleague because of our cultures. And so that's the insight that it gave me. So in terms of speaking to colleagues who really don't, I don't need to speak now, actually, because now I have the video, but originally in terms of speaking to colleagues, honestly, because I told Jennifer confidentially, I said to her that, you know, we had our EDI committee, showed 5 minutes of the video. All of a sudden, you know, we've extended a reach that we were trying to get for quite some time. So I don't need to speak anymore. But before, it would be about explaining to them that cultural intelligence is far beyond race, disability, gender, or any of those spheres. It's really about understanding people. And when you try to understand people, you become more inclusive.
Yeah, one of the things I tend to say is that inclusion isn't about other people and their characteristics, cultures, or identities. It's about us and our behaviors. So how do we demonstrate the best behaviors? And cultural intelligence as a framework really helps us to frame that, to look at things as widely as we possibly can. And if I may use this opportunity, Jennifer, to call out the fact that the current UK Home Secretary of the UK, a woman called Suella Braverman, she and I went to the same school. We had the same teachers, we had the same head teacher. She's just a couple of years younger than me. I was the first head girl of the global majority in that school. She followed a few years later with the same position. And if you were to look at us side by side, even on paper, you'd say these two women, they look the same. They got, you know, they're brown women, shoulder left back here, same education, grew up in the same sorts of area with the same people surrounding them. But culturally, values, certainly, you can't have another individual whose approach to life and humanity is more different to my own, just for the record. And so just because people look the same, it doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves behave inclusively, and certainly one person from a particular background doesn't represent all of that background. And so recognizing that all of us as individuals have a particular journey to go on to recognize how we can work and relate effectively across difference is an introspective piece of work, which can then inform our relationships and cascade through influencing others, and that wider piece. And
Sorry, if I can just say, because I just want to pick up on one of the points that that Joselyn made, because I think it's important that people who are listening to this don't think that the work that we do takes some of the pressure off the anti-racism agenda, because actually it puts more pressure on it. It just means that, and this is why our program is very uniquely designed around that model, because what we work really hard to do is to recognize the fact that you have to get all the cultures around the table. I often talk about it as being getting people on the bus moment. And if we're just screaming at people to get on the bus, they're not going to get on that. We have to really engage with, as Joselyn says, there's a large proportion of people in her trust who want to engage in the inclusion agenda. But for too long, people have kind of gone, well, that's for the BME people. Here's leadership, and that's inclusion. Now, what we're saying is actually absolutely not. When you lead well, you lead all people well. So what we're doing is bringing those two things together. And the results, whether we're looking at, you did the work last week with the policing webinar, we did the work with the NHS webinar, we're talking about leaders. The one consistent thing about all our clients is actually that what we have seen is more of a positive impact on the race equality agenda because of the fact that we're starting off from let's bring everybody to the table. Let's use that as a way to bring everyone to the table, and that actually pushes it. So I just want to be clear that what we're not doing here is taking the pressure off that agenda. We're just coming from that point of inclusion from the start.
Yes, and to add to that, MJ, I'm sure you have some points around that there are impacts, aren't there, that race brings to the issues that we're trying to address, in fact, with cultural intelligence as part of the solution.
Well, regarding colleagues and race, a lot of the time I'm the only person who looks like me in a room. So I'm a Black woman. I can't hide that. So I can't hide the melanin, and I wear that proudly. My terminologies that I would use is to say I'm shameless and unapologetic and unbothered. So if you don't like how I look, that's not my issue. You take it up with wherever it's bothering you. But regarding the work around race, there's lots of conversation around anti-racism framework. So I had helped as part of the Capital Midwife piece to develop the anti-racism framework. It is still a conversation to be had because we must acknowledge that we are occupying a country that is institutionally and structurally racist. So even though I said cultural intelligence transcends it all, I see the anti-racism work as a step or a pillar to get to that space, because you have to really break down some of people's understanding and open them up. And I'm going back into Stephen Covey lens again. You got to seek first to understand, to then to be understood. So when colleagues come at you to think that you don't want to talk about race, you're still going to talk about race, but you want to get them to that place to say, there is more to this than race. I'm a mother, I'm a Black woman, I've got a hidden disability, I'm aging, I'm all these other things. So if we want to go down the intersectionality piece, it is there, but let's do this. But if we could take on the inclusive part first, we would be able to capture all of that. So I am not in any way that I'm not in support of people who want to talk that race agenda, and I still talk that race agenda, but I just feel that the cultural intelligence piece enables us to take that humanistic approach and to be more compassionate in how we approach things, because I think if you just go down the race bit, you totally lose all the other richness that makes us who we are. And Marsha, I have to say, the Jamaican motto is out of many we are one people. So that is something that I pride myself on when I occupy spaces. And that's why the cultural intelligence piece, that resonates with me so much.
If I can just do the Trini representation, which is together we aspire, together we achieve. Just throwing that out there. Just certainly, I think as we talk about these things and we really try to reflect on how a model that Above Difference brings to these spaces can, you talk about transcending, working with, supporting to help deliver outcomes. This is what I think is so special about it, is because we know that racism creates the outcomes disproportionality around underrepresentation, or disproportionate numbers of people dying, or whether it's how they might be not present in leadership. All of these things are outcomes that when we do a systemic structural piece of work, which the Above Difference model around leading inclusively and cultural intelligence can bring in, then creates those organizational and personal behaviors which impact then
Yeah.
on those structures. And Jennifer, can you just explain a little bit more about, being able to deliver those elements of leadership so that you can reach those outcomes, which then tackle the symptom that is racism?
Well, there are a couple of things. When I set up Above Difference, I knew, having worked as a leader, been fortunate enough to work as a leader within the public sector, there were a particular set of things I wanted to achieve, and I knew I wanted to do things differently. And we always say, whenever I speak to a new organization, there are two things I always say to them. One is, I won't work with you unless I can work with your board first. And secondly, we're not coming in to do just a single training course. So, those are the two things I put out there first. And that's really important, because when I meet with boards, what I'm talking to them about is that leadership bit. It's really understanding that if you're leading well, you should be leading all your people well. So that means it's not a question of, oh, we're doing our leadership bit here and we need to get the EDI bit right over there. For me, it's about, actually, if you're not getting the EDI bit right, then you're not leading effectively. And then we're bringing in the cultural intelligence, which is then giving people the skills to actually really understand how their drive, their knowledge, their strategy, their action, all of those things work together. So the most interesting thing for me when I'm working with a new public sector organization is that meeting with the board. And that's often where we'll see the most radical changes. But then there's the inclusive leadership. There's the value-based leadership. That's really getting people to think about what values, how do they present themselves as leaders in this agenda? And within that, and then, what happens then is that the CQ becomes a tool to navigate your way through all of those things, because then you're beginning to look at the cultures within the teams that you lead, and how do you navigate yourself among those teams? How do you recognize some of those cultures? How do you manage change? And we're great fans of John Cotter's model, and we incorporate that into a lot of the work we do. And I think everybody, Marsha, because you did the workshop, and so we must get you to a more recent one. But I think Joselyn will definitely remember my favorite video, the penguins. And really then thinking about, actually, how do you manage the change process? And this is really important for Black leaders, or leaders from Black and minority ethnic communities, because one of the most effective things you can do is actually recognize the cultures that you're trying to influence and connect with them effectively. And often the fact that we're not actually doing that as effectively as we can make us less effective advocates, even for the race agenda. And so how do you recognize the culture of your board that you're trying to influence, or the culture of a network that you want to change? And how do you engage in a culturally intelligent way with that culture? So all of these things, your leadership as a leader, your approach to leadership, your values as a leader, yes, your cultural intelligence, your in what we call intentional inclusive leadership skills, and how you model the very change you're asking for, which is a very important thing. How all of those things combine together to make you a much more powerful leader for every agenda that you're involved in. And I think that's what you're hearing from Joselyn and Marsha.
And Joselyn, to Jennifer's point there, how do you model the change that you're asking others to deliver?
Compassion, understanding. I think that's really, really important. And that's something, I wouldn't say that I didn't have that previously, but I think that that's been enhanced by leading with CQ. I'm not as, I seek to understand more. Whereas before it would be, oh, well, that person is different, and you just left it there. No, I seek to understand more. So with the board, generally in my organization, they are majority, well, they're all white. I think bar one board member. We've got a couple of Black, Asian, minority ethnic non-exec directors. And so it's really speaking their language. So I don't speak to them anymore. Don't get me wrong, race is always going to be a part of what I deal with, but I speak to them about culture now. And I think that was what was so impressive to them when I showed the video, was the fact that I wasn't just saying, well, look, because it's a fact. Marsha mentioned before about embrace, the 5 times more, turning the tide, just in terms of COVID and some of the Black, Asian lives that were lost, the minority ethnic lives that were lost. The data speaks for itself. the whole of the workforce race equality standard was started by NHS England because the data spoke, you know, the lack of representation, you know, the lack of career progression, development. I mean, the list goes on. And when you looked at when you looked at most organizations, the top of the tree was white. And so it's evident. And so for me, I think trying to speak their language and trying to connect in a cultural way, as opposed to, you know, me being, oh, well, I'm a Black woman. No, you know, there might be some things we have in common. You know, there might be something that connects us. And I think I search for that more now, being more culturally aware.
And I think, you know, when you can go into a room and you can say, I understand where you're coming from, you can reflect back to them so they feel heard, and then you bring in this new perspective. It's just going to get you further with the kind of message that you're trying to land. MJ,
can I just say,
yeah, go on.
I always used to say you get more with sugar than salt, and this is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's that wider model piece that Above Difference creates. It's using CQ as a tool to be able to inform other approaches to create a more wider strategic way to bring your leadership and those in the organization along with you. MJ, when you're listening to, you know, Joselyn talk about how she would role model, how she is able to demonstrate the model that's been delivered by Above Difference, how would you describe what you've done differently?
Well, I think for me, what I perhaps hadn't shared at the beginning of our introductions, I occupy a lot of voluntary spaces. So I sit as a director for Jamaica Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So, you know, that's a vulnerable group here in the UK. I am a founder member of the Caribbean Nurses and Midwives Association, and I'm the chair of the Society of African and Caribbean People Midwives. So then the very essence of that, you know, I'm dealing with a lot of melanated people. So I do a lot of support around coaching and mentoring. So for SAWAC, you know, we've lost count of how many midwives we've been able to empower and really support to occupy leadership spaces, which they never were able to, and to occupy fellowships and, you know, navigating that. Now, in my day-to-day working world, I am that person that will bring that voice of reason. I will ask that uncomfortable question that would enable you to think differently. I'm leading, you know, previously sitting in my portfolio was the health inequalities work that we need to do. And how do we ensure that we are not just hearing one set of people's voice because they're shouting the loudest? What about these people that, you know, so I take offense when people tell me that people are hard to reach. You want to irritate me, tell me that, because nobody is hard to reach, because, you know, when nobody is no longer, even if you're living in a cave, people are hooking up Wi-Fi these days. So everybody is accessible, you know. So that's the approach that I take. How I role model that. I'm a mother of 2 girls, so I live vicariously through them, and to be able to role model those behaviors and to have those really frank conversations. So I'm planting a seed here for Jennifer. While she's doing the leadership bit, she may want to consider something for children too, because this is where my educator lens will come in. If you want to get it right for a generation, we normally start with the mothers and the children, because that's how you change the narrative of a community. So there you go. Give you a mantle there, Jennifer. No pressure.
So the extra discount then, Jennifer, for that business development advice.
Absolutely, absolutely.
No pressure for her, Marsha. But those are some of the ways that I say I do that, and people who knows me will say I rock up as my authentic self, because everybody else is taken, so I don't know how to be fake.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, and I think that's one from Oscar Wilde there, and I definitely appreciate what you're saying about that, about women and children. I think it's the statistic is when you change the outcomes for a woman, you influence at least 4 people. So it's the it's definitely something worth thinking about. There are a couple of questions that have already come up, really good ones. So I'd like to hop on those if I can straight away, because they're really, really good ones. And Jennifer, Marsha, and Joselyn, do you think, and the term's been used, BAME, I prefer to use it either underrepresented racialized groups or non-white or global majority. Do you think melanated people have a higher level of CQ than non-global majority leaders because they have more often they have to operate in different cultural contexts?
Can I go first?
Go, MJ.
I would say no, because that's an assumption, because you have melanin in your skin. Now, I'm Jamaican, but I embrace, I'm a Garveyite, embrace the Pan-African ideology, but it doesn't mean that I understand the lived experience of a Trinidadian, despite I'm from the Caribbean, or a Nigerian person, because they're Black. And that is the assumption that is made, that if you've got melanin, you're an expert in that space. The elephant in the room that we don't often talk about is the nuances that exist within our communities and the biases themselves that we are not enabled to see beyond. So if you ask me, we're just as bad as the white counterpart who we would presume to be racist. And we do need to make that active step to learn and evolve in navigating this space. So when I occupy a space and we hear somebody's racist, I am equally accountable to enable that person to change that behavior. I'm a part of the problem as I am a part of the solution.
Well done. That's amazing response there, Marsha. Yeah.
I'm going to be a bit controversial.
Go, Joselyn.
I'm going to be a bit controversial because whilst I agree with Marsha, I also feel that as a child of an immigrant, we have learned or had to learn to straddle cultures, because the way that I behaved at school was not the way that I behaved at home. The way that I behaved with my friends was not the way that I behaved with my family. So I wouldn't say that, yes, we definitely, it's easier for us, but I think that there is a knowledge there that possibly a white British person who's lived in England their whole life would not have. So for me, I'm not a hard yes, and I would say I'm a soft no.
I think sorry, go on, Marsha. I was just about to say, this is an interesting one, because there is research that suggests that actually your ethnicity does not determine your level of cultural intelligence. Okay, and I sign up to that, because I'd like to take the example that you just gave just now, Joselyn, which is why we need to be really careful with this, that actually, first and foremost, it really thinks of what do we mean by culture. So if we're talking about ethnic cultures, then yes, if we've straddled different ethnic cultures, that may make us more aware of those. But if we take culture, for instance, as its widest sense, let's take a white person who's grown up all their lives in the UK and actually lived across 12 children's homes. Let's say, take that as an example. Right. So again, that is somebody who in doing that was probably learned, yes, they may have not learned to navigate ethnic cultures, but they've learned because each of those homes would have had a culture. And so one of the big pieces of work we do in the way we develop this program is really get people thinking about what we mean when we use the word culture. Because there is a danger that we do assume that actually, because we are melanated or we do have melanin, and because we have, I grew up in, I was born in the UK, I grew up in Nigeria, I went to school in a different part of Nigeria, I came back to the UK. There is a danger that we can assume that actually we're more culturally intelligent just because of that. But the research doesn't back that up. And secondly, when we think of culture in the wider sense, as MJ says, the ability to navigate intentionally in a really effective way across diverse cultural contexts is learned and intentional behavior, And so I would say there's some cultures we might be more effective at navigating if you've grown up, but I think it's dangerous to ever make assumptions that just because someone may have lived in one country, that they haven't actually navigated in that country a lot of diverse cultural context.
And that's where I should have been specific then. I should have said ethnic culture, because
yes.
I do feel that that is a valid point,
yes.
that in terms of having to straddle the cultures, I know, you know, when I did the Workforce Race Equality Standard, one of the most emotive sessions I had was when the instructor drew 2 triangles, and I literally broke down. And I broke down because he explained that those 2 triangles showed an immigrant navigating in, you know, in their world, and then having to assimilate to go into the other one, go into the, you know, into the other triangle. And that literally was my mother's story. So for me, I completely agree with you. Yes, we have to be mindful about culture, but let's not disregard ethnic culture, because that's really important.
So can I just come back in? So my response was not ethnic culture. My response is culture in this context.
And that's why I agreed with you.
We're all in agreement. We're all in agreement here, really. And I think, you know, I did an interview with David Livermore, who I like to call the godfather of cultural intelligence, the founding president of the Cultural Intelligence Centre. And we talked about this, and we talked about things like code switching and covering, and the fact that when you are melanated, if you come from a racialized background, that you might have developed a muscle around adapting to different situations, cultures, because you're trying to, in some cases, navigate this thing called racism. You're trying to mitigate the stereotype threat that you're being presented with, because you don't want to fall into any traps that you're going to be stereotyped around your behaviors, and so you adapt what might be you suddenly start to talk a little softer when actually you're generally much more vibrant with these things. So that in terms of a CQ action adaptability capability, and earlier Jennifer put in the chat the 4 capabilities of cultural intelligence: drive, knowledge, strategy, action. Action is the adaptability, the way that you adjust your speech acts, the way you your body language, your tone, all those sorts of things. And David would agree that for the vast majority of racialized people living in mostly white contexts, there is a greater muscle that we've had to exercise around adaptability, which may mean that we have a higher level of that particular capability. Doesn't necessarily mean overall more culturally intelligent, but there might be something there.
And actually, Marsha, I think one of the things I've discovered, and this is my own personal journey, so this is not backed up by any CQ research, so let me just own this, is that sometimes that adaptability can be a strength, and it can also be our biggest weakness. Because if you like to think about the fact that many of us come from, you know, one of my favorite, you know, cultural value dimensions is high power distance. It's the one I love teaching because it's the one I identify with the most, having come from what I would say is a very Nigerian high power distance culture. So any Nigerian colleagues out there, as I always say in my class, when my father said to me, jump, I jumped and hoped and prayed it was high enough. Right. And as I always say, if I was to ask my low power distance daughter to jump, there'd be a lot of discussions about my lack of parenting, communication skills, and a whole range of other things. And there'd be no jumping involved because actually, you know, we've grown up in these different cultures. Right. But the key thing is, though, is that because those of us who came, and it took me time to learn this, that actually my high power distance upbringing meant that when I dealt with authority figures, I automatically adapted into what I was used to. So I automatically, in many ways, reduced myself. I automatically pulled back a little bit because I'd grown up in a culture where that's what you did when you were dealing with elders, seniors, seniority figures. And that meant I never really brought my full self into those situations because I learned, okay, here I am in a situation where I've got seniors, adapt. Right? Now, where you then begin to understand that from a CQ and enabling and an intentionally beginning to act differently perspective is I'm kind of learning, actually, if I need to influence a board, I can't go in there looking at that board as a high power distance and me being sort of underneath there. I need to go in and adapt my behavior in a slightly different way to influence and connect with those senior group of leaders. So I do think, you know, David's actually right. And we've had those discussions as well. But where I think it makes the difference when we actually understand the science and the theory behind cultural intelligence, and this is why we combine it with that inclusive leadership, is because then you now have that knowledge and you're flexing that muscle isn't an instinctive response. And somebody's asked the question now about instinct, is actually more intentional. So when you're then working with leaders or you're adapting in a particular workplace culture, you're actually doing it quite intentionally, which makes you much more effective as a leader. So now when I meet authority figures, I'm quite aware of my high power distance buttons in there, but I've also learned very effectively how to shut them off.
Yeah, when you're sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that's one of the great things about doing the assessment as well, isn't it? That you can have a clear idea of where you are. And when you understand yourself and you're able to do that self-awareness piece and do that introspective piece, you can then understand where you need to go, what you need to understand, what are the gaps that you need to fill, what your biases might be, what your challenges could be. And when you have that clarity, you can then start to move forward and do that introspective work in a meaningful way, which then helps you to role model some of those other traits that you're trying to deliver as a leader in the organization. They've got some great questions. Please keep them coming. Because they're really important discussions to have. Is there a danger that CQ will offer some people a back door out of challenging conversations and situations by encouraging people to collude or conform? MJ, is there a danger that CQ will offer some people a back door out of challenging conversations or situations? What's your view on that?
I think not, because the protected characteristics still exist and we will know. So if I use myself as an example, I recently went for a role and I knew that I was appointable and I knew I was cheated out of the role. I know it was because of the color of my skin and because it was a predominantly white panel. Now, the reality of that, is it going to let me just be talking about cultural intelligence and not talking about Black women navigating their space or just Black people in general? No. But I suppose it perhaps presents itself a little bit if you do not have the right people to feel comfortable with being uncomfortable and vice versa in those spaces to challenge those bits. So that's the point that I would say there, Marsha. It's that while you're navigating the cultural intelligence space, you need to have the courage that while you're removing the scales and taking this humanistic approach, you're not aware that somebody's treating you differently because of the color of your skin, or is it because of your disability, or because you're older, or whatever the protected characteristic. And I know the dominant conversation we have in this country is about race. So we need to still be in that place where we call a spade and not lose focus of what it is.
Interesting. Joselyn, do you have a view on that as well? Is there a danger that CQ will offer some people a back door out of challenging conversations or situations?
I agree with Marsha, but then I also feel for me that CQ actually empowers and arms you with the tools you need to challenge without making it, you know, basic or let's say just about race. Because when you start talking about cultures, and you refer to, you know, let's say our board as a culture and their culture and the things that they like to do, I think it empowers you to challenge. I think it teaches you how to challenge. So I agree with Marsha, but then I also feel that, yeah, it's like an armor.
What I tend to say is the language of CQ is not confrontational, but the level of introspection required can be uncomfortable. And therefore you don't avoid the challenge. You don't avoid, or it's not a back door to avoid the situation, but you asking people to look in the mirror. And sometimes that mirror holding is very difficult, very uncomfortable, very challenging, causing defensiveness. but you know, models not just with the CQ tool, but bringing in those other elements that Above Difference does with its leading difference differently, allows you to navigate those conversations in a particular way, which just enables you to hold up the mirror a little bit more sturdily and helps people to understand, okay, we'll just look at this corner for a moment. You don't have to look at the whole thing right now. And so being able to is encouraging people to collude or conform. No, I wouldn't have said so. I'd say like both our panelists and Jennifer have already said, it's an opportunity to have those challenging conversations in a way that is constructive. But that's not to say that defensive doesn't happen, but with the CQ drive self-efficacy piece, people can build up their resilience and confidence to navigate that defensiveness, discomfort and fear that they may feel when going through. That's my perspective on that.
Great perspectives from the three of you. And I think the thing I'd add on to this is why in the first part of our program, we spend so much time on looking at leadership as a concept. And one of the things that, this is probably our favorite saying, Marsha, is the whole one that says that, you know, the culture of any organization or team is shaped by the worst behavior that the leader will tolerate. I think I've trotted that one out every single time we've spoken. But it was interesting. Yesterday, I was with a senior leader, a senior white leader who we've done some work with. And she said something to me that really blew me away. And she said, you know, that sentence alone has just stayed in my head. And she said, and I was dealing with a situation where I saw someone do something to one of my members of staff who had a protected characteristic. And whereas before I would have let it go or just kind of like pulled her behind, I challenged it. And she said, I challenged it. And actually the person I challenged said, well, why did you challenge me in front of the person? And she said, because I need to define the culture. So when you know, and this is why I think is that CQ on its own, yes, there have been discussions about if you're just looking at CQ on its own, what is that equipping you with? But when you're looking at it for the purposes of inclusion, you have to look at the leadership bit. You have to answer the question, are you leading the inclusion agenda or are you managing diversity? Which is a question I often ask leaders. Because depending on which one you want to do, if you want to lead the agenda, then you're going to have to use tools like cultural intelligence to help you navigate those conversations. And one of the first things you have to do, and I think this is for all leaders, is that you have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you're not that, then you cannot lead the agenda properly. You have to be able to do that. So I think, you know, and my experience of doing this now and some of the changes we're seeing in the organizations, there are more of those conversations happening with people who have been through this program than there were before. And that's what people are consistently saying to us. I'm now having the difficult conversations and I'm confident enough to do that.
And that's a great testament to the work that you're doing, Jennifer. So another question is, some people believe all behavior is instinctive. Can CQ help transform our instinctive behavior? I'm going to throw that one at Joselyn, who's nodding.
I think it can. That's why I was nodding, because one of the points that Jennifer made, I think I would say when we had the debate, is because instinctively, while I may, when I was talking about straddling, you know, the fence in terms of two cultures, I believe that leading with CQ retrained my instinct. So now I'm more intentional, which means I'm giving it more thought and it's more thought-provoking. So yes, I definitely believe that leading with CQ changes that instinctive nature that you have.
MJ?
I echo what my colleagues have said, and I won't add anything more to it because that's just exactly what I think
we're. Yeah. Jennifer.
Yeah, I think as a leader, you can't just lead by instinct. And you know, we call our program Leading Inclusively with Cultural Intelligence. We target leaders. And you can't just lead by instinct. You know, you have to be intentional as a leader. You have to, you know, not just communicate, but connect. So, I think that's it. What we have to do when we're being culturally intelligent and inclusive leaders is we do have to take a step back. We do have to think about what we're doing. And that, I think, is what makes the difference between intentional, inclusive leadership and leadership that's just about saying, well, I'm kind of sign up to the inclusion agenda. I think there's a difference.
I think there's a very particular point about CQ and its ability to help with this, because of course, you know, to be human is to be biased.
Yeah.
You know, we're all having to manage our bias, our assumptions, our heuristics, our shortcuts that we're dealing with all the time. And CQ is a really useful tool to do that intentional, make conscious our unconscious, to create procedural change to mitigate our hidden and unhelpful bias. And so absolutely CQ can help transform our instinctive behaviors, because it's through, it never becomes unconscious, but through practice, it becomes easier, just like any kind of, you know, muscle that we're trying to flex. The more we use it, the more instinctive that becomes, to be more conscious about the kinds of decisions we're making, the behaviors, the communications. And so absolutely. And, you know, that's that intentional leadership piece that Jennifer does is really feeds into that.
And if I can just say, Marsha, that, you know, the definition of inclusive leadership that I really love to use in our programs is the one by the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion. And they define inclusive leadership as leaders who are aware of their own biases and preferences and actively seek out alternative ones in order to engage. So, you know, your CQ takes you as far as that real awareness of your biases and preferences. Your strategy helps you then begin to think about how you engage. But whereas in a sort of business sense, it's about, you know, your effectiveness in engaging almost outward. I think what you then begin to do as you add on the intentional inclusive leadership to your CQ bit is you're then questioning, where am I being intentional in the way that I'm engaging with cultures of, you know, cultures within my workplace that are different from me, and how am I actually being really strategic in doing that? So you're absolutely right. I think the two things work together.
Now, interestingly, we've been talking about the NHS, public services, etc., and that's your area of expertise, Jen. But we have a question here, which I love because I hear it so often. Do some industries and some sectors need CQ more than others? No, MJ's laughing. MJ, what do you think?
Well, I think the health and social care, perhaps I should back up and say probably public sectors need it a little bit more. And then that would then include health and social care, police, and education. In that particular order.
Interesting. Yeah, Joselyn?
No arguments there. I agree with Marsha. And for me, the greatest thing, so the civil service and the NHS, let's say, with such, in our trust, we are 60, let's say about 61.7% Black, Asian and minority ethnic. How can we not then bring changes when we are, I always say, ethnic majority? So, you know, I just feel definitely, I completely agree with what's been said.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Oh, I think the world needs cultural intelligence and inclusive leadership everywhere. Everywhere there are people. You know, we're becoming such a small world now. You know, you and I know that CQ grew out of, 20, 30 years ago when people were scattered all over the world, and it was about communicating across all of those vast networks. But now, I think working with people like Imperial and BART, you've got, I think I was told when we were doing some work with BART that you had about 192 different languages, or something like that, languages spoken in one trust. It's probably the same for something similar in Imperial. So the world is becoming such a smaller place. But I do think this has a huge role to play in helping us shift the dial when it comes to the inclusion agenda. We've been doing what I call going round the roundabout for a long time, and literally not coming off at any of the turns. It's just like having the same discussions over and over again. I set up Above Difference because I wanted us to do things differently, and particularly in the public sector, probably the biggest employer of people from Black and minority ethnic communities across all the sectors. And so do we need it? Absolutely. Am I keen to see us doing more of it? Absolutely, because I think I don't want in 20, 30 years' time to hear the same discussions going on about EDI and the data that we've been having for the last 20, 30 years. We've kind of got to move the dial now.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Jennifer. And certainly, do some industries and sectors need it more than others? I'd say the issues that we have around these things are societal, and there's no sector or industry that exists outside of society. And so it really doesn't matter. I mean, I do a lot of work in architecture and the built environment, construction. Oh my gosh, architecture, the places that we actually exist in as humans are being shaped by only like one particular demographic. That doesn't seem right. And so sadly, no one is immune from needing cultural intelligence. So if you get the opportunity to spread the word, I would wholly recommend that you do so. And there's another question here: how can we sell CQ with the present day war on woke, aka culture wars? For example, some parts of the public sector have EDI roles removed. How can we sell CQ with the present day war on woke?
If I could probably start by answering that, I never go into an organization selling CQ. What I do is go into an organization talking to people about how they can improve their leadership, and and CQ is one of the tools they can use to do that. And I think that's important, because I always say to Dave Livermore, as you said, are sort of, my mentor as well as yours, that the one thing I didn't want to see CQ to become, was become another UB, where it was just like, okay, here's another sort of newfangled American thing that's supposed to address the agenda. I personally think, and that's why we call all our programs Leading Inclusively, that actually when I talk to boards, I'm talking about how they lead all their people well. And there is a really financial incentive to do that, because I always say to people, if you've got 10 staff and you're only leading 6 of them well, then 4 of them are underperforming, you're trying to achieve your full objectives with 60% of your staff group. I would suggest that's not a good leadership model. So I think when we look at it like that, and the other thing that works really well for in terms of what we do and has opened a lot of doors with many of the organizations we work with across the public sector, is the fact that we are going on looking at culture and inclusion as a whole. And that means that, again, we're bringing people into the conversation in a way that feels safe, but doesn't stop the fact that it's still challenging and it's still about change.
Absolutely. MJ, Joselyn, do you have anything to add before I ask Naima to see if there's anything in the chat that we should be talking about?
Well, I think before we get to Jennifer, somebody has to plant the seed somewhere. And the line would always be, if you do nothing, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. And the conversation in which I would do that, because of the space that I occupy, it's through the lens when we're talking about health inequalities. When you talk about the WRES data, there's nothing transformational about WRES. It's a transactional piece that has nothing humanistic about it. So it's about how you then start to use the evidence to say happy staff, happy patients. And then you tie that into your patient safety agenda, which is very focused on outcomes and experience. So if we treat somebody badly and their length of stay has to be a bit longer in hospital because it's the lack of somebody cultural intelligence in navigating their space, which then fosters psychological safety, that's a whole car crash we're talking about, so that's the lens in which I will bring people to that table for them to understand the different nuances. But you would need to be a leader who occupies that space and embrace this thinking to be able to impart that to others. So I don't take a one-pronged approach, because you got to talk about the people which you're working with directly. You got to talk about the society it's impacting, but also the financial cost. So when you treat somebody badly in a hospital, a member of staff, this is, and they're out for 2 years and you got to pay them full salary and they're likely to take you to ET, you've damaged a life, it's impact on their family, but also the financial cost. So, you think about cultural intelligence, you start to think about your return on investment. So if you've got leaders that are leading well, your numbers around poor patient experiences and outcomes are going to reduce. Your numbers in grievances in the organization are going to reduce. So that's how I speak to that, because when you're trying to get people, you got to speak to the language they understand. And in my world, that's the language they understand.
Absolutely.
I completely agree with everything you just said, Marsha. The only point, the caveat that I would add is also staff well-being and patient care, because you did mention about, better staff and better patient experience. That is so important, but nothing really else to add apart from that.
Yeah. And in fact, there's one more thing I'd like to add, though, and it really is a reference to both of our panelists and guests, Marsha, is that I think the difference is when you've had people like MJ and Joselyn in those organizations, leaders who themselves were prepared to fight for this. And, both of them put up a fight. It wasn't a quick, oh, we're going to do this. And then, oh, there we are. There were, I know Joselyn had to really push it through to make it happen. There were some things we couldn't control, the pandemic and a whole range of other things, but sometimes it's just getting through that bureaucracy. Marsha literally had to sit on people to get them to the place in the first, to get them to the classes in the first place. So I think if you're listening to this and you want to bring this into your organization, then you will get that resistance. But I think using your own cultural intelligence to connect and really put that argument through in a really powerful way and be prepared to stick at it, I think makes a lot of a difference. And I think for both MJ and Joselyn, that was the thing that I really admired, that they fought the battle to get it in there and now are reaping the rewards of that.
Can I just also add, because the other part of the question, which I don't think we addressed, was the wokeism and believing in the lie that the media wants to spread, because what's happened is a complete converse of, so we had George Floyd 2020, the protests, the Black Lives Matters, and it's almost we've done an about turn. And I think that there's been a deliberate campaign by the British media, which is extremely right-wing, and it's almost like trust being apologetic. And I say this with an anecdote. So we lost our head of EDI quite recently, and our advert for her replacement was put into the Daily Mail. I think it was the Daily Mail or the Evening Standard, saying, oh, well, look at this, look how much they're paying this person when nurses are going to food banks. And I think that this is the danger. We are not enemies. We are not at war. We must not believe that lie. And we must continue progressing in everything that we're doing, including leading with CQ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Naima, was there anything in the chat that you think we should be discussing before we wrap up for today?
Wow, we have amazing comments. Literally every time one of the panelists spoke, there were comments coming through. There's one from Anupama. She says, or he says, sorry, what I notice is that inclusion agenda is often about putting people of color on the team, but only those who align with the majority view. This is an unhelpful approach in my view, as it hinders the very voice of the very people they are meant to represent. I agree with Marsha that two people of the same color may not have the same values and may not be representative of that group. That's a really, really good comment there. We have Rubina. CQ does bring cultural values and unconscious bias together in a way nothing else has done for me, and feel that's what makes leading inclusively with culturally intelligence so powerful.
Hi, Rubina. Rubina is a facilitator we've trained for Derbyshire, and wonderful, wonderful person. Can't wait to meet up again, Rubina. So thank you for saying that. Yeah. And I noticed Katrina has just said, how do we move this forward? And I, I don't know, Marsha, without stealing your thunder, one of the things I don't think there's been a time when leaders from Black and minority ethnic communities need to be more culturally intelligent and inclusive themselves. And we need to see this as a real tool to help us navigate these really difficult spaces we're in. And I was working really hard to control my face, Marsha, when you talked about the things you shared with the current secretary. And yes, I shall very respectfully continue to keep a straight face on that one. But there is unfortunately a real narrative developing, right? If leaders shape the culture in which we operate, the shaping of the culture around this agenda and EDI that is happening from the top of the country at the moment is pretty abysmal. and it's pretty worrying. And so we need to really understand how we navigate this space and how we become more effective, and how we don't just communicate about what it is that we want, but we connect with people. You know, I love that John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. If we're going to move this agenda forward, then we've got to not just shout and talk about what's wrong. We've got to become better at connecting and influencing with the powers that be in order to get things right. And that moves us from people who are managing the problem to actually leading us forward. And we've got to have a clear vision. And so this is all about how we, and this is what I've learned along the line, how do I become a powerful leader in my own right? One who's able to make a difference, one who's able to connect with all the diverse cultures I need to connect with in order to make a difference. And that, I think, is a challenge for all of us who are leaders in this space, all of us who are leaders in different organizations. We've got to become more than just experts on a particular issue around equality. We've got to become leaders for inclusion. And that's a whole new ballgame. And I hope that what we're bringing in terms of the leading inclusively with cultural intelligence is going to equip a lot of leaders out there to do that effectively, because that's how we'll make the difference.
I agree. One of the things that I think that that was most impressed on me in terms of the course, and I really take offense when people say, and this happened recently, when they said training, because it's so much more. It's not training, you know. But one of the things that that was really impressed upon me was having to be self-reflective and having to look into my own biases. And I was so surprised. I remember when I first sort of did CQ, and I was so surprised that, what, I have biases? And it was, you know, it represented a whole new world for me. And so I think it's important that as we continue that conversation on, we continue to be self-reflective, and we continue to ensure that we are being inclusive in all arenas, not just professionally, but in how we lead our everyday lives.
Here. MJ.
I think for me, the question is, how do we move this on? It's a simple quote, you know, be the change you want to see. If you have not started to invest in yourself to evolve, and you choose to repeat the same cycle, it's your opportunity to break that. And that's the very basic foundation as to how we can move that dial forward. Because if you don't have a tribe to be able to do this collectively, one person as an island will not achieve it. So that would be my takeaway, or my golden nugget as a gift to those who are listening today. If you've not embarked on that journey, get on that journey, get on that step.
So if we can end then by saluting our sisters as part of Black History Month, saluting MJ and Joselyn and Jennifer today. Joselyn, is there a sister you'd like to salute before we close off today?
Gosh, there are so many, but I will just deal with the sisters that I'm surrounded by in this webinar. The work that Jennifer does, I don't really know lots of the stuff that you do, Marsha, but just by how you have hosted today, I think, you know, or facilitated, I should say, I can definitely see you know, a sisterhood there. Marsha Jones, amazing. Neymar, I love. So really, I just want to salute the sisters that I have around me right now. I think it's a hard slog, and it's a hard slog every day, but each of us in our various industries are making a change. And so I salute all of you.
Thank you, Joselyn. MJ.
Well, I'll echo what Joselyn has said. But I also, as we're entering into Black History Month, I like to pay homage to the giants whose shoulders that I stand on, and for my ancestors who have paved the way, because life has no coincidences. Our journeys, our history, all compiled to who we are today. So COVID happened, and I know it had a lot of bad things, but listen, if COVID didn't happen, I would not have met you guys on this journey. We would not have been here today. So I want to close with the statement that my mom always say, with all things, give thanks. So it's been a real pleasure to be on this platform and to continue that sisterhood journey. So, and of course, meeting another Marsha.
Thank you. Jennifer, if you'd like to close out today.
Yeah, actually, before we click, can I just ask Naima? Naima, who will you be saluting today? And you, Marsha. I think we've got to do, if we're going to salute, then all of us have got to. So before I give thanks and say thank you, you two have got to salute. Who are you going to salute? Naima and Marsha.
Naima, you go first.
Well, I'd like to salute every single woman. Because we're based in the UK, I'll say I'd like to salute every single woman in the UK, every woman of color, because each and every one of us out there are having, we're going through life with our own little struggles that no one knows about, and we're facing each challenge day by day. So literally every single woman of color and the ones coming up, I salute them all, and grace, courage to all of them. And yes, that's who I'll be saluting.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I'll just, obviously, I feel very strongly as well about not only the women in this room, but I'll just single out my mum. Because, upon whose shoulders I stand, whose sacrifices have been made, woman of colour who worked in the NHS for 41 years as well, who made supreme sacrifices so that I could sit in front of you today. So to my mum, her name's Ramroop.
Right. And I want to salute all the women here as well, and all the women, all the women of color who are in the audience today. We've had a great set of people who have stayed. The numbers are still really high. I salute all of you, and I'm going to salute even though it's saluting the sisters, I've got to salute some of my Black brothers as well, brothers from Black and minority ethnic communities, people like Rob, who's just been on all our webinars, and a lot of others. I want to salute you as well. But I wonder, Harriet Tubman always remains one of the women who comes to mind when I think of one of the giants, and particularly because she was a leader. She led people out, and I always try and imagine what that must have been like to take this collective group of really wounded, disappointed people and lead them into a different place. And she remains a real inspiration for me. So to all of you who are out there, we just salute all of you. I want to just say Naima has posted inside, one of the things Marsha said was about, MJ said was about investing in yourself. We've got our first in-person webinar coming up in November. I'm so excited. We've done everything for the last 2-3 years on Zoom, but this time we'll be in London. We'll be in South London. If you're interested, we've put a special voucher in the chat for you, so do get in touch if you want to develop yourself as a leader who knows how to lead inclusively with cultural intelligence. But we really salute all of you. And just to say, the recording of this will also be available. So for those of you who didn't catch, if you've got friends who didn't catch it, we will share the recording with you. Do spread it wide. But remains to say thank you very much to Marsha, to MJ, Joselyn, and you, Marsha, for just being here.